You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. Today I want to talk about the concept of the body budget, an idea that's been put forward by the psychologist Lisa Feldman-Barrett. And I want to talk about the body budget and how it affects us. Now imagine that you were the chief finance officer for this big organisation, and this organisation has locations and offices right around the country, and it's your job to kind of be monitoring the finances of all of these offices so that they've got what they need in order to do what they do. And so your job then is to kind of look at their budget from day to day, hour to hour even, just to make sure everyone's got the right amount of money that they're going to need for whatever activities they're about to be involved in. So I don't know, you might know that, for example, the Wolverhampton office are going to be running this big event. And so you might send a big flood of money in their direction. You might notice that the Leeds office has got too much money over there. So you'll actually take some of that in order to send it over to Wolverhampton to help with their event. So your job is to constantly monitor the needs of all these different locations around the country and ensure that you send them the right amount of money so that they can function and do the things that they need. And keep all elements of the company running. Now the thing is, what happens though when you spot a need but you just don't have the resources to spread around? So you might notice that Wolverhampton has to get a big event, but there's really nowhere else that you can take that money from in order to send it to them. And in fact, they're short of money again. And the whole organisation is depleted. All the different locations are struggling to function well. And there's nothing you can do about it because you just haven't got enough coming in to share around. Well, if you put yourself in that position, you might have some empathy for your poor old brain, because this is the job that the brain is doing constantly. If you think of the brain as you as that chief finance officer and all the different parts of your body as the various locations in that organisation, then what your brain is actually doing is exactly the same thing. It's trying to budget energy in your body to keep you alive and well. And so just as you were thinking, well, Wolverhampton have got these needs coming up, and trying to predict what each location needed, your brain is doing the exact same thing. It's trying to predict your body's needs and send the right resources to that part of the body. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're out in the street and then suddenly you notice a gang, and the gang seem to be paying attention to you. Well, your brain will notice that you're facing a potential threat. So it will start sending resources to your muscles. It will start sending blood to your muscles so that you've got what you need in order to run away. So it's predicting what you need in advance and sending the resources to you. But just like in your example before, what happens if it just doesn't have the resources? What happens if our body is needing things, as it's constantly needing things all the time, isn't it? It's digesting food, it's breathing, it's perspiring. Now, what happens if your body no longer has what it needs in order to function well? And the answer, according to Lisa Feldman-Barrett, is that our mood suffers. So what do I mean by mood? Well, mood, according to this idea, is mood simply describes how plentiful our body budget is. So if we're running low, for instance, then our mood is likely to be low as well. If we're in a state of plenty in terms of our body, then our mood is high. So when we talk about mood, it's this kind of background thing. But what it's reflecting is how plentiful our body budget actually is. Now, why is that important? Well, because what happens is that when our mood is low, what we'll often do instead is we'll make sense of it by putting an emotional label on it. So we'll notice our mood is low. And of course, our mood is a reflection of that body budget. And instead, we won't say, oh, my body budget is low. We'll say, well, I'm miserable, I'm down, I'm sad. We create an emotional label to try and explain the fact that our body is feeling out of sync. And so you might say, well, surely that's not the case. You might say, surely these are dodgy thoughts rather than the body. After all, many psychologists will deal with just the thoughts in your head and will focus on those. But let me give you 3 examples that might persuade you that when we've got a low body budget, that it will actually result in that emotional feeling. So that it's not about thoughts necessarily, but about what's going on in terms of our bodies, in terms of our body budget, that we just don't have the correct resources in order to give ourselves what we need to function well, and so our mood drops. Now, the 3 examples I'm going to give you is first, hunger, second, fatigue, and the third one, a lack of movement. So let's start with hunger. Now, imagine you're a prisoner and you're up for parole, and you're hoping that the parole board will let you out of prison earlier. That's your hope. You want to be let out of jail a little bit earlier. Well, you would best hope then that when your case comes up, that it doesn't come up just before lunch, because the research shows that you're much more likely to have your case denied just before lunch than just after lunch. And you can see why, can't you? Because after lunch, everyone's been fed. So everyone's mood is higher. Everyone feels a lot more lenient. Oh, go on then, let them out. But just before lunch, well, everyone's grumpy. They want their dinner. And so the research shows that if you're up before the parole board just before lunch, well, you've been very unfortunate, because you're not as likely, anywhere near as likely, to be released. And you've all experienced this. I know I've experienced this, that sense of feeling really irritable, but really I'm hungry. There's even a word for it, hangry. It's where we pin the emotion of anger onto something that's really about our hunger. So that's hunger. The second example is fatigue. So let's say you've been kept up most of the night. Let's say you've only had an hour's sleep. And now you've got a hard day at work. Now, my guess is that you're hardly full of the joys of spring in that situation, and you feel miserable. But it's not because you've got the wrong thought patterns. It's because your body budget is low. And so you've got that sense of being dragged down by the fatigue. And so what you do is pin an emotional label on it and say, well, I'm really miserable. Or maybe you're irritable. But what's really happening here is that your body budget is low. And just like you trying to send things across the organisation, there's just not enough resources to ensure that you're functioning well. And then as your mood falls to low, then you'll feel miserable as a result. So that's hunger and fatigue. So let's look at lack of movement. Let's say you've been sat in a chair all day and you notice that your mood has slipped. Maybe you tell yourself that you feel sad, or maybe you're feeling restless and agitated instead. Because our bodies are made for movement. They're designed to be moved. And so when we're sat in a chair all day like that, often we'll get to a point where our mood feels low. We'll feel that agitation, or we'll feel sad. And yet, because our body needs to move, we'll go for a walk and we'll feel better. And so you can see there 3 examples of hunger and fatigue and lack of movement that result in your body not getting what it needs. And so your mood falling and then pinning an emotional label, not because of thoughts, but because our body's budget is just very depleted. So the mistake we can often make then is we'll focus on the thoughts first, or we'll even go to the emotions a little bit early, when instead what we can learn to do is to focus instead on the underlying mood. Think of it instead maybe as, my body budget is running low. What can I do about it? And it allows us to sell a story then that is about a body that is running with not enough gas in the tank. And so we can come up with kinder explanations of why we're feeling the way that we are, rather than telling ourselves that we're crazy or we're always miserable or whatever it happens to be. We can start to tune into the body to come up with a kinder potential explanation for what's really going on. And so let's have a recap then in terms of what we've learned in this episode. First of all, we saw that example where you're the chief finance officer trying to predict the needs of each different location of the organisation around the country and make sure that you're sending money over to them. And how the organisation can get stuck if it just doesn't have resources to come in. And we looked at that because that's how your brain operates as well, just trying to send resources to different parts of your body in order to ensure that you function well. And so we saw too that when you're low on resources, your mood becomes low as well. In fact, that's how we defined mood. When we thought of mood, a good definition of mood is simply to say that it reflects the body budget. So when we're depleted and it's running low, we have this kind of background sense of mood that is also running low. And when our body budget is nice and full, then we feel good. And we saw 3 examples of that, didn't we? Where we're hungry, or we're tired, or we're just too still for the amount of movement our bodies were designed for. And we saw there that when we give the body what it needs, it actually helps and our mood changes. And then finally, we looked at that idea whereby if we bypass our thoughts and bypass our emotions and go direct to the mood, direct to the depletion in our body budget, that we can get ourselves to an alternative story about what's going on for us in that moment that can actually be more accurate and more practical, because it gives us something that we can, first of all, do about it in the moment, but it also gives perhaps a kinder story about what's going on for us emotionally as well. So if this has been interesting to you, let me know what your takeaway is. Just write to me at info@alunparry.com. Alun, of course, is spelled A-L-U-N, the Welsh way. So info@alunparry.com. So let me know what you got from today's episode. If you'd like to work with me directly, of course, you can do. I'm Alun Parry. You can find out more at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And please do share the episode so others can get the benefits as well. And finally, why not subscribe to the podcast? Because it's completely free and it means you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another one.